All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Deena Shakir. How are you doing?
Hey, Kent. I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
This is great. I so appreciate you doing this. Deena is a partner at Lux Capital. They manage more than $2 billion and invest in pretty cutting-edge technologies. Before that, she was at Google and GV. That's the Google Venture, we'll call it an arm. You probably didn't guess it. Before that, she worked at the State Department under the Obama administration, under Hillary Clinton, presumably. And before that, you probably really didn't expect this, was a reporter for the Washington Bureau of the BBC. So you've kept yourself fairly busy.
Definitely a nonlinear path for somebody in venture, that's for sure.
How does that arc happen? Like, how does that arc begin? Like, you get out of college, and you start looking around, and you seem like you're going into a more media or government area than where you ended up. Like, how does your ambition start coming out of college?
Yeah, on the one hand, I did grow up in Silicon Valley. I was actually born in Mountain View, a rare Bay Area native. When I used to tell people that at Google, they found it surprising that there were actually humans in Mountain View before Google was a thing. But
Right.
That's where I grew up. My parents immigrated here from Iraq decades ago. My father's a physician and escaped in the 70s. And
So what was there in the 70s? What was that? Were they on the wrong side of some kind of regime, or were they refugees, or what was that situation?
So at the time, the Ba'ath Party was just taking power. And so my father is a physician and had just graduated from medical school and sort of saw the writing on the wall as that party was beginning to take power. The government was becoming more autocratic. Of course, if you kind of fast forward history, indeed, that is what the next several decades look like. So he did flee, found his way initially to Lebanon, and then made his way to New York, which is where his only sibling at the time was, and started his residency there at Columbia, and finished off at Stanford because he came here for a conference and fell in love with the Bay Area. And so that's how he ended up here.
Do you ever think about the other thing? Do you ever think, he could have stayed and joined the right party and you'd be...
Every day. In fact, that's literally one of the guiding principles of my life, is just the serendipity of my birth and my existence, my good fortune of having been born here. There's so many things that could have happened that would have changed, every bit of fortune that I have. And that's really been a guiding principle in terms of helping me choose everything from what I want to study to what I want to do, to what I continue to want to do, to how I raise my children. That's a huge part of it for sure.
So you have the classic immigrant parents, scientists, so probably pretty driven. You go to Harvard, probably pretty driven. Graduate cum laude, great. Okay, you're out in the world. How does it begin as you sort of look down the arc of your career at that point?
Yeah. So, even if you look at what I studied as an undergrad, I probably, like every child of immigrants, there was a day or two where I thought I would be pre-med just to make my parents happy, until I realized that meant I would have to take organic chemistry. So that was a quick turn. But in truth, being in high school, a teenager during 9/11, being a Muslim and Iraqi American, that was a really pivotal moment for me, where it was the first time where I felt like these two parts of my identity that really always felt like they were fluid and just part of who I am, all of a sudden seemed like they weren't to some people. And that helped, that was troubling for me. And then of course there was a war between my country of origin and my country. I'm American. So those things really were challenging during those adolescent years. And so I ended up studying Middle East studies at Harvard, otherwise known as Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. And I thought I was going to do a PhD in anthropology. I thought going down that path, being an academic, working on changing the narrative was going to be my way of making an impact, my way of making sure there was not another 9/11, that I would help work on that hyphenated existence of so many people. That was my initial goal coming out of undergrad.
And so how do you end up working for, I'll just pick a point early in the career, working for the BBC here in America?
Yeah. So I did not get into my dream PhD program, and I'm very grateful for that. There is no way I would have been cut out to be an academic, but I applied to only one program for a PhD, and I didn't get into it, and I was crushed. But I did get into with a full scholarship to an incredible master's program at Georgetown. And so I ended up in DC straight out of Harvard. This was 2008, just a few months before the financial collapse and Lehman Brothers, which was interesting, by the way. Ben Bernanke was my class day speaker. He spoke just a few minutes after I did because I was also our class day speaker. So I remember actually I turned around. Don't go look up this speech, by the way. You'll see a very different view of me and my hair in 2008.
Oh, wow.
Now you're going to go check it out. But I remember turning around to thank him, and he had left the stage. And now looking back, I wonder if he was getting one of those urgent calls about some financial crisis that was unfolding in June 2008. But in any case, being in DC when Obama was inaugurated at a really pivotal moment in our history was another watershed moment for me. And how did I end up at the BBC? Well, again, I wanted to do a PhD in anthropology, and to me, being a journalist was sort of vocational anthropology. It's storytelling, it's truth telling, it's shedding light. I actually very briefly was on air, a broadcast journalist I did a bilingual news show, Arabic English news show on Al Arabiya. Which again, that was very short lived. And then I realized I needed to learn institutional journalism. So I spent a summer as an intern with the BBC. I would hardly call myself a full-fledged journalist. It was in between my 2 years of graduate school. And that's when I was covering the White House and the president's speech in Cairo in 2009, which was a very pivotal moment for diplomacy between the Muslim world and the U.S. That became known as the Cairo speech. And it's a speech where he unveiled a new program of public diplomacy that became known as the Cairo Plan, where he talked about entrepreneurship and technology as a way of building bridges with the Muslim world. And I will never forget how I felt when I listened to that speech, and how I knew that I wanted to not just be writing about this, but actually be a part of this moment in history. And I made it my job to make that my job.
And that's how you ended up at the State Department? Did Hillary call you up, or you called up Hillary Clinton? Or how did that all
Well, I mean, literally at the time, you know how it works in politics. Oftentimes, speeches get made and then policies get formed as a result. So while I was there with the BBC, I was trying to track down what happens next. What office will be working on this? Is this going to be run out of state, out of USAID, out of the White House, et cetera? So as I was tracking it down, I started to develop conviction that this is what I wanted to do. I finished graduate school. I got something called the Presidential Management Fellowship, and ended up, I was also for a year working at USAID, which is where part of this program started, and helped launch the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which is what came out of the speech. And then was at State for 2 years working on this under Secretary Clinton.
What of these two professions, this is very unscientific, but there's some really successful people in venture capital who are journalists and entrepreneurs who are journalists. Mike Moritz is maybe the most famous, but I just talked to the guy who founded and runs Gusto. He was a journalist after having been at the Harvard Crimson as well. And then obviously on the State Department, the government side, I mean, Sheryl Sandberg was in Treasury at some point, I think. Yeah,
she was.
What is that path? Is there a reason for that, or is that just kind of coincidence?
It's an interesting question. So, and there are actually quite a few. So, of course, Mike Moritz is sort of the godfather of this VC or this journalist to VC path. My former partner at GV, MG Siegler, is another. There's Om Malik. There's Ryan Lawler. There's my friend Catherine Boyle, who's now at General Catalyst, many more. I think on the journalist side, you need to be able to identify trends early, to identify leadership. You need to be able to get to the crux of the matter very quickly. You need to be able to follow a lead. You need to be able to source, to have sources, to do so stealthily, to diligence quickly, to know who to call, to have people who call you. Those are all things that are really important in both fields. You also need to have an obsession with truth and with with truth telling, and with sort of, that's what science says. I mean, lux, the word lux means light in Latin, and so I think that's part of why you see a lot of that. And just like me, I mean, a lot of journalists get so excited about what they're writing about. I think that they oftentimes get sort of this like dopamine rush from the chase. In terms of government as well, Cheryl's an interesting story. There's a few of us. You'd be surprised. I mean, you couldn't think the bureaucracy of government couldn't be more different than high tech in many ways, but the leadership required to run an organization and bureaucracy like that, there's actually quite a bit that's translatable. And so there's Sarah Cannon, who's a good friend of mine from DC, who's now a GP at Index, for example, and others as well who have taken that path.
Yeah, I just talked to on the podcast Rob Chestnut, who's the general counsel until recently general counsel at Airbnb, and he started his career having been a prosecutor in Washington D.C. And he was prosecuting AOL back when nobody knew what AOL was, and found eBay on it, and thought eBay was pretty cool, and sent his resume to jobs@ebay.com, and ended up in Silicon Valley.
It's amazing.
How do you make the shift over then back to Mountain View?
Yeah, so that one, I was in government, and then the Arab Spring was beginning to unfold, and this was in 2011. And another moment where I was sort of witnessing a region, not only where I was from, but what I had studied, both as an undergraduate and in graduate school, what I had worked on professionally for several years now, where I had reported on, and where I had spent time working on policies and all of a sudden, and I wouldn't say that it was a Twitter revolution or a social media revolution. I don't think it's that simple, but I did see technology platforms changing realities on the ground in a way that I didn't think was imaginable previously. I had spent 2 summers living in Egypt, for example, when I was in college, and I didn't think that we would see an era without Mubarak. Now, it's a bit of a less optimistic scenario now than I think we felt back then. But at the time, there was a lot of hope and optimism. And that got me really excited. I felt we were in the midst of what's now been called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I got really excited about that. And also, I was coming out to Silicon Valley a lot, happened to be where I grew up, where I had a lot of connections. I was doing that for the State Department. And every time I came out here, I felt this energy and this excitement and this get shit done mentality that was so refreshing compared to what I was experiencing, in DC, that I just I became obsessed. And so that was really compelling. And I just set my goals on coming out and got lucky enough to find the opportunity to do so.
And what do you make now, kind of, looking back like a couple of years, looking back at technology in revolutions, is it what we thought, oh, everyone's going to communicate, organize, overthrow the bad guys. But there's some countervailing forces where the bad guys do things with the technology, or the technology allows. I mean, what's your sense?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think some of the most interesting use cases of technologies have been using technologies that were designed for their use, that were more platform plays. There's a lot that's been written around the ethics of defense tech, and I think that's a whole nother question. But when it comes to software specifically, again, the democratizing piece of it is what gets me really excited. I get really excited about technology that streamlines really analog industries, that allows people to do things more quickly, and whether that means grassroots organizing or whether it means accounting, right, to set up their business, et cetera. And so I think it can be problematic when you try to design something or architect something in such a way to instrument and a revolution or something like that. The examples I've seen of that have been really ineffective. And I think what's been more effective are these grassroots, more platform plays, that we've seen.
Well, if you look at something like Zoom's not an educational tool,
right?
Except that it is, when everyone starts using it for that and co-opting it. So you end up at Google. That kind of makes sense with your background. But how do you go from being on the sort of operating side of Google to saying, I'm going to invest in other entrepreneurs and other people's ideas?
It's a great question. So, the transition to Google, I was actually exploring a few opportunities at the time, including some early stage companies. Decided on Google because at the time I had a really cool opportunity working at the intersection of impact and technology. Google.org back then was focused on creating product for social impact. Now it's more focused on grants. But back then I got to work on the civic innovation team. So I was launching a lot of Google's elections efforts, helped build the civic information API, which has powered most of the both the US and global elections efforts. So it was a really good kind of intersection of my past life with what I wanted to do, and a great way for me to learn product. And then I sort of stumbled upon healthcare at Google, and became obsessed with how broken of an industry it was, obsessed with the potential of technology to fix it. I mean, this is like 2013, 2014, and helped to build Google's first HIPAA compliant product. Now Google has done much more in healthcare. At the time, it had a bit of a tarnished history with health, which I learned the painful way. And then I really quickly realized that big tech was not necessarily going to be solving some of these intractable problems. I was coming across small teams, individual entrepreneurs, bootstrapped in some cases, that were doing things far more effectively than the teams of hundreds of engineers that I was working with at Google. And that was blowing my mind. So I ended up sourcing some of these companies to my friends in venture, considered joining a few of them, and then realized, given I had worked on so many different products and types of products over the years, that really a natural next step would be in the venture world, and join GV.
Do you think the healthcare thing comes from having a parent who's a doctor?
I think that's definitely part of it. The only MD I have is a medical daughter. Right. But it's been really fun to geek out with my dad on some of the medical stuff. I mean, up until a few years ago, I think he still thought that I had a chance of going back to medical school. So.
He's not one of those people who's disappointed still that you're not a doctor.
For sure. He had 4 kids, and none of us ended up becoming doctors. But I'm the closest because I literally read medical journals for fun. So.
Is it Sergey, the Google founder's mom, who's still disappointed he didn't get a PhD? I think. So from GV, you're kind of decided that this is how you're going to leverage your ability with capital, and you look across. I mean, not that it's the easiest thing to find a job at a venture firm, but you can probably choose from a couple. How did Lux kind of become the thing that you committed yourself to?
Yeah. So, GV was an amazing platform for many reasons. Obviously, I had an incredible career at Google and loved it, and I was, within the Alphabet family. But we had about 12 co-investments with Lux. So I'd gotten to know the team through that. I had a personal friend who's now my partner, Bilal, who, was a mentor. Known him for a long time prior to even considering a career in venture, just a personal friend of mine. And as I was thinking through what I wanted in terms of a partnership, I really wanted to go somewhere that was intellectually rigorous, that was thesis driven, where there was, a robust sort of sense of principle and ethics, and just a place that I could help kind of grow the partnership. There were a number of different options that I was looking at, and it became immediately clear to me in conversation with some of the partners at Lux, just how differentiated they were. And I talked to quite a few firms, and I couldn't be more happy with my decision.
And as you looked across the venture landscape, there aren't a ton of women in venture. There's some. I've had Maha Ibrahim on, a bunch of folks.
Love Maha. She's so dear to me.
So what a fabulous conversation. Just so enjoyable.
She's one of my favorite people. Yeah, I love her.
But it's a thing in Silicon Valley. How did you kind of see that? Were there places that were not friendly to you, or friendly to you for the wrong reasons, or what was how do you view that landscape?
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up with 3 brothers. I was a tomboy growing up. I kind of got, I was used to sort of being the only woman. But it wasn't until I joined Google that I really felt that sort of how hard it was in a professional setting, because I was on the product side at Google, where I was consistently the only woman in the room. I found myself literally dressing differently, putting my hair up, not wearing makeup, unconsciously, and that was a real challenge.
That's funny. That is if you've ever read the Alpha Girls story, like the
I
first
have, yeah,
women venture capitalists in the 80s,
yes,
and maybe today this is not how people would say it, but they were like, yeah, we just, to fit in, we just, wore the pants and the hair and
oh yeah,
got on with it, basically.
I find it fascinating. I studied as sort of an unofficial minor in college, women, gender, and sexuality, and I find the whole concept of sort of the professional identity of minority women in certain professions just to be fascinating and depressing at the same time. But in terms of women in venture, I think we've come a long way, particularly in the last 3 years. I literally joined maybe 3 months before that moment, if you want to call it that, where everybody realized this was an actual problem. In the summer, I think, of 2017 is
right,
when a lot of this came to light. I think we still have a very long way to go. Some of the solutions may have potentially created additional problems around tokenism, for example, around clicks, around a certain folks or groups taking up all the oxygen in a room, et cetera. But that being said, I've seen some really great progress in terms of intersectionality, which is really important to me. I think initially there was a lot of, a lot of the voices that were emerging for women leadership in venture were cis, white women.
Yep.
And that, at least, we were having women leaders, but that was still problematic, and there wasn't a space for others. And that's changing.
Right. What do you make of, and just diverging here for a second, of women in Silicon Valley with, I don't know, but like the exceptions where you're like, there's not that many women leaders, except for the woman running Facebook and the woman running YouTube. There's these like insane exceptions. Meg Whitman running something on the venture side, maybe Mary Decker having $1 billion fund.
Mm-hmm.
How can that be? It just seems so odd that there'd be a few that are so wildly successful.
Mm-hmm.
Then wouldn't everybody want to invest in the next Mary Decker? Doesn't everybody want a woman to run their company so it's worth $400 billion?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a clever question. I don't have an answer. It's
a very good question. I think in some ways it's a question to ask the exceptional women and the exceptional investors in those women, and the investors who passed on those exceptional women. Right. But it's a challenge, and as someone who gets asked a lot by other women, for advice and all of that, like, I have to say, like, a lot of it is, there's no textbook. You can't there's no do this and do that. Like, a lot of it is, you have to have a really thick skin. You have to have grit. I mean, I sort of talked about these transitions I've made in my career. When I was trying to come to Google, how many times I got rejected?
More than one.
Oh my God, literally dozens. Right. In fact, the job I ended up getting is the very same job that and I got recruited for that job, by the way, but the very same job that I applied to and got straight up cold email saying that I just didn't even meet the qualifications, couldn't even get an initial phone screen, and was about to accept another offer when a sourcer or recruiter reached out to me, essentially begging me to take a meeting with them for that very same job.
Wow.
I had people telling me I didn't meet the basic qualifications of, X, Y, and Z. So it's challenging in a lot of ways when especially when you're dealing with, a certain type of recruiter who's used to seeing, a certain profile.
When people ask you for advice, hey, I want to be a venture capitalist, do you just tell them, look at your path, right? Like, from PBC, you can't go join the Trump administration, probably. What the heck what would you tell somebody? Just like,
what I say is, think about what value you can add to a partnership and to a portfolio. And one of the reasons that I joined Lux is because it was so clear to me. I didn't have to sell. I didn't have to say, I can bring this value, I can bring that value. Like, in that very first meeting, I didn't have to explain or tell some story about why being a journalist, being in public service, being in product, being an operator, all of that makes me a good VC. They knew that, they understood that. And so whatever your path is to venture, there's no one way. Look at all these amazing investors that you've interviewed on your podcast. How many different stories have you heard? So there's no one way to do it. The question is, what value can you bring? What experience do you have that makes you good at what you do? And that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Right. So now you're investing in something you're passionate about, healthcare. What is going on in healthcare? Like what is exciting in healthcare? It's like healthcare for me. I briefly worked in healthcare finance at Deloitte, and it was so complicated and so crazy. I was like, I could never work in that industry. And it's such an odd thing where the parts of healthcare, you go into a hospital and there's some surgery and you're just like, you can't believe how incredible it is. And then there's some things like, well, why haven't we found a single way to help an ALS patient in 30 years? It's just such a crazy, crazy world that you're in. Like, what's exciting you at this point? Like, what's happening in healthcare?
Yeah. Healthcare is definitely one of the areas that I get excited about, and it's not my main focus. Generally speaking, I get excited, as I said, about sort of technology that is streamlining analog industries, and I think healthcare is one of those. But it's certainly an area where most of my experience kind of centers around. But what is happening in healthcare? Well, a lot of people would tell you, of course, that this is now no longer like, necessarily like a revolutionary kind of perspective, but certainly COVID-19 has changed a lot of things when it comes to technology in healthcare, particularly around virtual care. And, the idea of virtual visit and telemedicine, went from being something nice to do as an alternative to, for many people, being kind of commonplace, both on the sort of provider front and on the patient front, which means, of course, the payers had to figure it out, the regulatory frameworks had to be changed, et cetera, et cetera. So that, but that's just one tiny small piece of it. And that doesn't really mean that much, because any doctor will tell you that is not a replacement for healthcare. So what else is changing? Well, one thing that people aren't really talking as much about is the fact that health systems, so hospitals and ACOs and so on, are suffering because their budgets are, slashed. No elective procedures, headcount freezes. Selling into hospitals right now is actually really, really hard. It's always been hard, by the way. Like, people have to hire like specialists to do that, but it's particularly hard now just because of the cost center perspective. So even if you're building a technology to sell into a hospital right now, even if it's like perfect for a solution that's like, going to help them figure out something specific to COVID, it's going to be challenging. So I think we have to figure out something that's more downstream. So I'm interested in problems that are not necessarily within the hospital. For example, aging in place is one area that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, particularly, given the way a lot of people are thinking about nursing homes and SNFs right now, with how COVID has just blazed through them in a just incredibly depressing way. So as, baby boomers are sort of continuing to age, and as we think about taking care of our own parents, and they are becoming a more digitally native population, what can we do in terms of both hardware and software on that side? And on the opposite end of the age spectrum, fertility is another area where I think it's just, from a user experience perspective, absolute crap. And there's the opportunity there, all the way from embryo selection through sort of the surrogacy experience.
And where do the entrepreneurs come? The classic joke in Silicon Valley is like, someone will invent the 1,000th music discovery tool because it's a 25-year-old guy before they do the first diabetes program management tool. Mm-hmm. Like, where do the entrepreneurs come from who are working on fertility and aging in place and these types of things? Is it just smart MIT people who need to look at these areas, or is it coming from, where's it coming from?
One of the reasons I love this field is because there's almost always a personal connection here. Like a lot of the fertility companies, there is somebody has gone through it, their family has gone through it. They've realized, how like incredibly painful it is, literally and figuratively, et cetera. Same with aging in place, dementia. I've seen some solutions around that as well. There's a relative that's gone through it, et cetera. So that's oftentimes what impels the passion around it, which can be very powerful.
Yeah. So looking at the, more broadly, everything that's analog has been digitized already. Like, why isn't that the case? Like, where do you see things where, like, in the last 20 years, we haven't gotten to, and I say this with tongue in cheek, because every 5 years we hear that everything that's ever been invented, it's been invented, or going to be invented, has been invented. And obviously,
Yeah.
it's never
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, totally. I think digitization is one thing. Just like, .com boom was one thing, but I think there's such fascinating advances that are happening on an exponential basis, like literally daily, like particularly around NLP and machine learning on the biotech side, et cetera, that there's still, like, we're just at the precipice, I think, of where we can begin, whether, again, it's something like, I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't, education, for example, is an area that where I've made an investment in a company called Moss, which is using artificial intelligence to make the process of searching for financial aid easier. Right. So clearly there were already platforms for you to search for scholarships. However, they've made that so much more sophisticated that the process is so much easier now. Like, this was meaningful for me personally because that was a process I went through. I paid for college by myself, patching together all these scholarships. Right. And now that is something that is changing the lives of students on a daily basis.
And as an investor, where do you start? Do you say, hey, NLP is a big deal, we're looking for NLP applications? Or do you say, who cares about NLP? Just tell me what your company does and whether it uses NLP or, who vitamins, I don't care. Tell me what the thing is.
Yeah. So everybody has kind of a different approach. Like I said, I personally prefer to be more thesis driven. And I think that's generally how we look at things at Lux. And oftentimes, you go deep in one area, which sort of opens up a window into another one. Whether it's looking into, for example, computational biology for drug discovery, and then realizing you can apply computational biology to the development of alternative proteins, et cetera. So we do some new co-incubation as well, and we will, have an idea sometimes and find an incredible entrepreneur and work together with them at the earliest stages. Other times there's an amazing founder, as well as sort of an area where we think there's an opportunity. And so there's no one way that we sort of think about new opportunities there.
So as you're investing, you've started this great chapter of your career. COVID comes along and kind of sends everyone back home and does all the things it does to the economy. And how does it affect you as a venture business?
Yeah, I think this is so unprecedented on so many levels, literally every level, that it remains to be seen. I think in the beginning, like everybody else, we were, the industry was like trying to figure out what's going on, certainly in March, right? For me in particular, because I was looking at so much virtual care and telehealth, it was like actually super busy because I think a lot of these companies were like scrambling to take advantage. I don't want to use those terms, but there was some tailwind. So I was seeing a lot of those. But now, I'm sure you're seeing this, like it's not slowing down across really all the industries. It's quite busy, even though it's summertime and it's COVID, very busy time. We're not really seeing it super affected. I think we're all getting used to this new normal.
Certainly in a very weird way, more than you did in January. Like, that there's going to be a pandemic. It's already happened. And how it affects you. So in some sense, there's, in a very weird way, there's less uncertainty. So I think you can kind of conclude like, hey, digital things that connect people across distances without them having to be in person are probably going to be a thing, whether it's because COVID doesn't go away quickly or it's just because that's how the planet will work better if we're maybe on fewer airplanes for business trips. So in some sense, the things that have happened seem like they've made some sense. Like, Amazon, like people are going to order more stuff. And unfortunately, when people become unemployed, they're
You
labor
can make
costs,
them like
whatever.
COVID-informed thesis predictions. That's true. The
Yeah.
other thing that's interesting is sort of you know, the idea that nobody's really meeting in person to some extent has also kind of democratized access a little bit, in the sense that, there's no longer these, you don't necessarily have to get on a plane
Yeah.
and meet, and meet with somebody. You don't really necessarily even know where somebody is necessarily, unless that's the first thing you're asking. And that can be a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of curious about that because everyone's like, oh, this is working great. And it's a lot of people from their second homes in Lake Tahoe
Right.
who are working with a group of people that they know through being in the same physical office, going to dinners and things like that.
Yeah.
I wonder when it comes to like recruiting new people um, and interacting with people that you didn't previously know, didn't previously shake hands with. I wonder how well that works, and I actually just wonder, I don't know, or if we're just using up the social capital that we've built through the years.
You mean more on like internal team building, or more on new investments?
Like on internal, I think on new investments, people are just, well, this is my opinion. Like you can kind of get over it. You can kind of have enough Zoom calls with an entrepreneur that you do enough reference checks that you get there. But
Yeah.
I wonder with colleagues,
Hmm.
like if a new person joined your team,
Yeah.
would they just be permanently disadvantaged to the people who had been working together and going out for drinks or whatever it is
Yeah.
for years?
It's a good question. Our team has always been bi-coastal, which is an interesting phenomenon. So, Lux started off in New York City, and 10 years ago ish, we opened up our Bay Area location. And so for me, I joined almost exactly a year ago, and I've always sort of not had that physical proximity with at least half the team. And so I've always had to sort of take that, I'll see them once a quarter or twice a quarter, but there's always been that difference in terms of that. So I've been able to have that kind of A/B test in that regard, and it's not the same, obviously. So I think that is hard. But I have actually recently connected with a few people that I mentor in the industry, all of whom are women actually, who have joined new firms recently. I don't think they have anything to compare it to, but it
Right.
seems that it seems to be going okay. I think probably because there are no interactions with anybody else, that like
Right.
I think people are all going to feel a little weirded out when we start actually seeing people again and having to put on real clothes. And
That is really true. And it's kind of funny too, because one of the things that you get in this business is like, oh, he or she's traveling. I'll talk to you when I get back, which has
right,
always been weird because they're not
right,
traveling somewhere that doesn't have the internet. But putting it
totally,
aside, but
yeah.
now all of a sudden that
What's
is,
your excuse?
yeah. And so generally it just seems like calls that used to take weeks to schedule happen in days.
It's true. I think a lot of people, not in venture, but on the sort of enterprise or large company side, were worried about people working from home and what their performance would be. But it seems from everything I've heard from our companies that people are working harder, to the
Yeah.
point where now the issue is not performance, it's burnout.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard some interesting, I talked to a guy who runs a big investment banking operation in New York City, and their concerns were more that their younger employees are just stuck in different situations. So this guy was in the Hamptons with his kids, and it was, whatever that's like, but probably not
Yeah,
horrible in July.
right.
And he's like, look, we have these young associates who haven't built networks necessarily, and they're in apartments in New York with two roommates.
Hmm.
So their focus was on how do we get them back into the office.
Hmm.
And by the way, they don't have an answer. Like the elevators seem to be a problem. And
Yeah, there was just an article that I came across yesterday, actually, that was doing some sort of survey of I think investment banks, or maybe it was New York-based companies, that I did identify younger employees as the key of folks who want to get back. I would have assumed it's parents, just
right.
based on my own
Yeah.
situation, but indeed it was maybe some are parents, but
Yeah.
as you said, mostly those younger employees who want to get back. Yeah, New York is going to be a tough one. I don't know how they're going to deal with elevators. Although I did see a self-sanitizing button technology company the other day.
It's not just taking out a pen and poking it.
No,
Um,
it's using UV.
yeah. Old technology. Well, I'll kind of finish with this a little bit. Your experience having kids and sort of, it seems like people are sort of taking things into their own hands, like in the sense of
Yeah.
whether it's restaurants figuring out how to put a table outdoors or parents going, okay, I guess I'm going to have to, never in a million years did I think this, but I'm going to have to figure out how to educate and socialize my kids next year. Because
Yep.
it doesn't seem like the state has it figured out.
Yes.
How
Have
do
you
you
been
think that's going
following
to,
this fascinating phenomenon?
yeah,
It is so crazy. I've actually always been, ever since becoming a mother and a parent, I've been just truly fascinated by parent groups. When I was at Google, there was this like email list of parents, and the sort of desperation of being a parent, like not knowing what to do and how difficult it is, and everything about it just like lends itself to this sort of village concept, right?
right,
And then in my opinion, now I really rarely use Facebook. The only reason I'm on it is for these groups. That's the only value I get. And I can't tell you how much value I get. And right now, there's this scramble of parents in California specifically, but really everywhere, to figure out how to educate their children. And to your point, socialize them. It's not just about like sticking a tutor in front of them. It's devastating to so many parents who don't have these options or resources from an equity perspective, right? But
right.
yeah, I think it's, I'm not surprised so many journalists have picked up on this. I was part of those very earliest conversations. In fact, I was thinking about this even before the governor's call to go fully virtual. But it's one of the many examples, I think, of sort of everyday citizens trying to hack a solution together in sort of a vacuum of leadership
Yeah.
in these unprecedented times here.
And what do you think, or what are you seeing as like the solution for, because I think a lot of people are kind of deferring doing anything about it until the governor of California's Gavin Newsom
Mhm.
said, hey, the school's going to be virtual.
Mhm.
Well, from that minute, that's when people said, okay, I either got to be okay with that or I got to figure out a way to do something with my kids. What solutions are you seeing people kind of
Yeah.
come up with other than just being resigned to?
So I've seen 5 or 6 companies in the last few days alone that have spun up to do, it's a marketplace, right? So they've spun up to find either accredited teachers or basically sort of nanny plus kind of caretakers who can either manage the distance learning of children, basically with 2 working parents who's going to sit there and make sure that they can get through the Zooms and so on, or completely design a curriculum for students that can also match them potentially with other students in a pod, so they get the socialization aspect. I've seen companies that will do everything from the sort of HR arrangements to dealing with testing for the teachers, COVID testing, to handling sort of physical arrangements. I've also seen parents coming together and doing sort of co-op like arrangements where they essentially will have, you can imagine 5 families, 1 day a week. Each parent takes a day off, if you will, and manages their students' curriculum.
That seems like a pretty logical. It just seems to me that not having kids, a puppy, but not kids, that the two things that just need to happen are somehow kids have to be with other kids. And somehow they have to be out of the house for a couple days a week. Like,
Yeah,
seem to be the
yeah,
two things that parents are like, I'll go to a lot of lengths to make sure those two things happen. And the
yeah,
sort of, let's get 6 or what is 5 families or 10 families together and just go 1 day a week or however you work it.
yeah.
Seems like a pretty logical solution.
You'd think so, but the if you've ever been exposed to any of these parents group,
Mm-hmm.
I would. I don't think I've found a more controversial group of people. Like there are, certain topics that literally turn into a firestorm. You can imagine like the Twitter sort of hot topics, like
Yeah.
multiply that by like an exponent, and that's what you get when you put parents together, the
Yeah.
emotions, all that. So then you add a pandemic on top of that,
Yeah.
and you add friendships on top of that, and the challenge of bringing people together who have the same general values and same pedagogical philosophies. Then on top of that, how are you social distancing? Like,
Right.
how do you define your level of like conservatism on social distancing? Do you
Right.
go to a grocery store? Do you wear a mask? Is it this mask? I mean, it is just crazy. And people will find whatever data they want to find to tell whatever story they want to tell.
Yep.
You can find an article that says kids are not transmitters of the disease. You can find an article that says they do. Daycares are spreading it. No, they're not.
Right.
It's
Yeah, it's fun. I have a friend who he's in parent groups, and his issue is his point of view is just that he understands the science of it all, and he's just kind of concluded that it's okay for his kids to be with other kids.
yeah,
And he's not like being irresponsible or anything. That's just his view on the science, and that
sure.
it'd be better for the kids to be with other kids than not to be.
Yeah.
But his issue is like, he's like, I just can't say, he wants to say it on the group so he can find the other 5 parents who think the same thing.
Sure.
But he's
Yeah.
like, I just can't say it because I'll just get,
Oh, I don't blame him.
5,000 posts of,
I
this
don't
article
believe
and
there's
that
a lot of
article.
shaming around that. There's
Yeah.
so much shaming. People are so righteous
Yeah.
with their indignation around whichever way they are. It's terrible.
That's a little bit of the problem too with like the offices and things like that, where anything you say or add, who can argue, right? So if someone says, well, instead of 6 feet, 7 feet's better, it's like, okay, like 7 feet's better, maybe 8 feet's better, maybe double plexiglass, like it's kind of hard to say like, yeah, that doesn't, a simple one would be like, if you're a scientist, you're like, look, this thing isn't transmitting outdoors. You don't need to wear a mask outdoors.
Right.
You'd never say it because you're like, it couldn't hurt.
Totally. And the thing is, the judgments are not judgments around data. People are making judgments on people's, like, literally, on their core values. Like, you are a bad person if you do this or you don't do this, right?
Yeah.
I've literally seen friendships of people I know that have almost ended because one family is okay doing XYZ and the other one isn't. And these are really unintended consequences of this pandemic that, in addition to all the other more, devastating ones as well.
The social implications are crazy.
Yeah.
As you look forward, wrap up here, but what are you optimistic about now the shock of this is over, we're in it, you're at a, fabulous firm investing in probably the coolest stuff or, the most impactful stuff in the world. What are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the potential of human ingenuity to get us past this goddamn pandemic, and that all of the grit, struggle, entrepreneurial kind of, hacking together, but also, incredible innovations that I've seen are going to continue past this, and really interesting phenomena will emerge that we even have yet to see. And I think that's going to be great. I mean, so if you look kind of historically back at some of the most difficult times in our history, really wonderful periods have emerged out of those. And I am optimistic that will happen. I have to keep reminding myself that during the dark times, during the really sad stories that I hear. I feel very fortunate, of course, given my own circumstances, and I've been lucky enough not to have anyone in my family, really sick or touched by this. But it's been devastating for so many families. And so I have to remember that we're going to get past this and we're going to be stronger. And I feel blessed that my job is to find and invest in the people that will be helping us to do that.
Well, you really have a front row seat for the innovation that's happening and about to happen. How do people find you or follow you, or what's your preferred way to communicate with people who are interested in what you're up to?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Deena Shakir. I'd love to hear from entrepreneurs, investors who are interested in helping fund and find these incredible companies.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this. My guest has been Deena Shakir. This is Something Ventured Podcast. I'll talk to you next time.